Greetings. Recently, Vocab Malone posted a video which officially and publicly announced the debate between the Jewish Christian apologist Dr. Michael Brown and the leader of the Sicarii Israelite group, Ahlazar ben Lawya, also known as Guerilla Hebrew. And that's the video that you see on your screen. Sicarii also posted a similar video announcing the debate, and I'll link to both videos in the description. Now, in this video, I just want to offer a bit of a preview of sorts by sharing some brief preliminary thoughts on the debate. But before I share my thoughts, let's first take a look at the first minute of Vocab's video, which had the salient details, such as the precise topic of the debate and the platform which will host the debate.
Here with Guerilla Hebrew at Sicarii camp, we are announcing a very special debate. You versus Michael Brown. Want to tell them what's it about?
Dr. Michael Brown, and we'll be debating Ashkenazi Jews or the 12 tribes chart. Who are the legitimate children of Israel? Hot, controversial topic. It's been sweeping the nation the last few months, and you have a leader in the Hebrew Israelite community and a PhD scholar. Get ready to go head-to-head on that topic.
Yeah, so Brown put out a debate challenge a couple months ago around the Kyrie stuff, I think maybe it was. Said anybody who's willing to debate me. Ahlazar said, I'll do it. I knew both parties involved. I said, hey, you know, this guy challenged you back? Brown said, no, but let's do it. After a couple months of kind of negotiating, real smooth, just iron out the details, we got it on lock. So the platform is
Berean TV, all right? On Berean TV, man, a brother who we known for a while. Y'all may have seen Deacon and Sergeant Yashub over there debating, talking, things of that nature. So the Berean TV, respected brother on the Christian side, but, you know, well respected and connected with us on the Israelite side.
Everybody knows them, and everybody feels like they'll be treated fairly over there.
Okay, so with that, I want to break this video into 4 different sections. First, I want to share my thoughts on the topic of the debate. Then, after that, I want to touch on Brown's strengths and perhaps a potential weakness. Potential weakness? Those 2 topics should cover the bulk of this video, and then I'll taper it off with a comment on the platform which will be hosting the debate, which is Berean TV. And then finally, I'll close it out with a very brief note on Ahlazar himself, in which I'll share my thoughts from a Christian perspective and as someone who is at least somewhat familiar with him. So let's begin with that first section in which I share my thoughts on the topic.
And we'll be debating Ashkenazi Jews or the 12 tribes chart. Who are the legitimate children of Israel?
Official title is 12 tribes chart or Ashkenazi Jews. Who's the legit children of Israel?
All right. Quick technical note for those who don't know. By 12 tribes chart, Ahlazar and Vocab meant the tribes chart which is used in the one west stream of the Israelite spectrum. And that chart posits that the true Israelites are comprised of the West African diaspora in the Americas, which descends from the victims of the transatlantic slave trade, as well as Hispanics and Native Americans. Now, this strikes me as a difficult debate, as both populations which are being referred to, on the one hand Ashkenazim, and then on the other hand a conglomerate of African Americans and Hispanics and Native Americans, both populations being referred to have their share of polemics against them. Now, obviously there's more polemics against the Ashkenazim, but for anyone who's familiar with the one west stream of the Israelite spectrum, there's also polemics against the tribes chart. But first and foremost, the participants in this debate, at least I think so, the participants in this debate need to be clear about their respective definitions of Israelite, right? If the definitions aren't clear, then Brown and Ahlazar are likely to just argue past each other. They might go past each other like ships in the night. Because without clear definitions, it would seem highly difficult to determine whether a set of arguments ever demonstrated that one or the other population fit a particular definition, right? Now, I think Ahlazar's definition is pretty clear. He holds to a patrilineal definition of Israelite, which is to say that on his view, an Israelite is one who descends from the biblical Jacob on their strict paternal line. In other words, irrespective of what women the men in your family may have had children with, if your father's 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 line goes all the way back to Jacob, then you're an Israelite. And if your father's 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 line does not go back to the biblical Jacob, then you're not an Israelite, right? That's Ahlazar's view. And while demonstrating who today might fit that definition, can be rather difficult, at the very least, the definition itself is pretty clear. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. As for Dr. Brown, I honestly don't know what his definition of Israelite is. I'm guessing that he does not hold to a patrilineal definition. Actually, I'm confident he doesn't hold to a patrilineal definition. I would guess that perhaps he holds to some sort of a rabbinic halachic definition, but I don't know. I'm not sure. But I do think that Dr. Brown needs to be clear on the definition that he'll be working with. He needs to make clear whether he agrees or disagrees with Ahlazar's definition, and he needs to make clear that if he disagrees, he needs to make clear what his own definition is, right? Because that is really the central question. Do the populations under discussion fit a given definition of Israelite? So, of course, the question is, what definition, right? And the question of the legitimacy of conversion is likely to come up. Ahlazar does not believe you can convert into being an Israelite. As for Brown, I'm guessing he's going to acknowledge the legitimacy of conversion and recognize converts as well as their descendants as being among the Israelites. For me personally, I think there is a difficult question of whether that includes conversions which happened well after the advent of Christ. The question of whether you can become a member of the true Israel by converting to an explicitly Christ-denying faith. If I can segue a bit and to touch on a personal note here, for me personally, perhaps one of the more troublesome things that I've heard from certain Christian Zionists, not all Christian Zionists, but certainly some Christian Zionists, something troublesome that I've heard from them is that a convert to Judaism even qualifies as a natural branch, to use a phrase from Romans 11. On that view, a Gentile Christian is at best a grafted branch, while a person who does not descend from Jacob and who explicitly denies Christ can become a natural branch via his embrace of rabbinic Judaism. And that's definitely not an idea that sits well with me. But then, unlike Dr. Brown and unlike Ahlazar, I hold to an ecclesiastical definition of Israelite, which is often disdainfully called replacement theology. So perhaps I'm well outside the parameters of this debate. I am under the impression that both Ahlazar and Brown can be understood in some sense as upholding permutations of dispensationalism, even if Ahlazar's views might strike many as rather different from a classical mainstream dispensationalist view. Or perhaps, to put it in a different sense, perhaps one might wish to say that Ahlazar's ideas descend out of a dispensationalist framework, but are not currently dispensationalists. Who knows? But moving on from that segue, the question of genetics is also likely to come up, which will again take us back to the question of definitions. For example, on a patrilineal definition of Israelite, autosomal DNA and mtDNA can be irrelevant, right? And so too, on a rabbinic definition, which accepts converts, all of DNA can be irrelevant, right? It's also worth noting that on a patrilineal definition of Israelite, various studies of Ashkenazi Y-DNA have consistently given the impression that the majority of Ashkenazim do not descend paternally from the biblical Jacob. And that the reason why I say this is because no paternal haplogroup has a majority amongst Ashkenazim. So no matter what haplogroup one hypothetically assigns to the biblical Jacob, we could still say that the majority of Ashkenazim will not have that haplogroup. And therefore, we can say that the majority of them do not descend from Jacob, even without knowing Jacob's haplogroup. As for the populations on the One West Tribes chart, they are quite diverse patrilineally and, with a number of different haplogroups amongst them. So it seems safe to say that both populations have significant swaths which do not descend paternally from Jacob. And I'm sure some recall the controversy over Ahlazar's own haplogroup from last summer. If not, I'll link to a few relevant videos in the description. But if genetics does come up, it's worth noting that Ahlazar himself rejects haplogroups as relevant to determining paternal lineages. So one is left to wonder then what's left, at least when discussing genetics. And putting that aside, there's a lot more that could be said, but the point that I'm trying to convey here is that this is a difficult topic, and I'm guessing that Ahlazar will devote a portion of his presentation to arguing that the persons on the One West Tribes chart fit biblical prophecy, while he'll argue that Ashkenazim do not. And a lot of people might not be familiar with that subject, with that approach. I'm not sure how familiar Brown is with One West arguments along those lines. And that will bring us to the second section of this video, as one's strengths and limitations in a debate are directly related to the topic of the debate. So in this second section, I'd like to discuss Brown's strengths and potential weakness, right? Potentially, but there's a potential weakness. That's why I put a question mark in it. So let's talk about Dr. Brown's strengths, right? Aside from his academic background in Jewish topics, Dr. Brown also has a long history of doing apologetics and a long history of debating. In formal debates, knowledge of the topic is not the only tool one needs, right? Familiarity with the art of debating itself is also a helpful tool, right? Those familiar with Ahlazar know he has a number of debates, but Dr. Brown has been on the debate scene for a far longer amount of time, right? For example, the first time I ever heard of Dr. Brown was when he debated Shmuley Boteach, right? I got to watch that debate live in person at a synagogue on Central Park West in Manhattan. I think it was at the synagogue called Sicarii, Israel, right, which is a historical Sephardic synagogue. I might be mistaken about that. But whatever the case, it was a synagogue on Central Park West in Manhattan. And, you know, the significant point is that that debate took place in 2007. I actually attended a debate between Dr. Brown and Shmuley Boteach in 2007. And it's my understanding that Ahlazar started watching Israelite videos maybe around 2009, back when GMS and the ICGJC were going back and forth on YouTube, right? And perhaps he joined GMS the following year in 2010 or maybe in 2011. But the salient point is this: Brown's debate with Boteach was in 2007, before Ahlazar adopted the Israelite worldview, and thus well before any of his debates as an Israelite. But it gets deeper still, right? You see, Dr. Brown had a debate with Tovia Singer back in 1990. Now, I don't know Ahlazar's precise age, but I'm guessing he's in his very early 30s. So Dr. Brown's debate with Tovia Singer may have happened before Ahlazar was even born, right? So think about the implications here. Dr. Brown has been debating longer than Ahlazar has been debating. Dr. Brown has been debating longer than Ahlazar has identified as an Israelite. And it seems that, you know, it can even be the case that Dr. Brown has been debating longer than Ahlazar has been outside of the womb, right? Dr. Brown has been debating since before Ahlazar was born. That seems to be the case. And I don't think that Dr. Brown's debate with Tovia Singer in 1990 was his first debate. So while it can be said that Ahlazar is a seasoned debater, I think those who are familiar with Ahlazar will note his various debates and, you know, refer to him as a seasoned debater. In all fairness, it should be said that Dr. Brown is a far more seasoned debater. You know, having decades more experience in debate, in the art of debate, can be a huge advantage in a debate, right? Because he's going to be much more familiar with the timing and the art of debate. So that's definitely one of Dr. Brown's strengths here. But I fear that that very strength itself might be a potential weakness, or open the door to a potential weakness, right? Because if I stopped here, let's say I just stopped this video here, those who are already confident that Brown will win this debate might hear what I just said and become even more convinced that this is going to be easy for Dr. Brown. But overconfidence and underestimating Ahlazar can be a weakness, right? You know, I've seen a number of Brown supporters disdainfully wave Ahlazar off as light work, you know, and honestly, I think that's a mistake. So let me state now, for those who are unfamiliar with the young man whom Dr. Brown will be debating, that Ahlazar is quite intelligent and quite creative, and he spent over a decade contemplating various approaches to precisely the topic that they're going to be debating, you know, which is the One West Tribes chart vis-a-vis the Ashkenazi spectrum, right? You know, some of Ahlazar's approaches to that question might be unorthodox, but that can also mean that Dr. Brown will be less familiar with them. And as was noted earlier, Dr. Brown is the more experienced debater in general, but I don't think he spent much time on this specific topic, while Ahlazar has devoted years of his life to grappling with precisely the topic of this debate. You know, and I've noticed a few people who have commented on this debate have likened it to James White's first discussion with Rachaz Shayar, the leader of GOCC, that happened back in 2016. But the Ahlazar ban Lawya of 2023 is not the Rachaz Shayar of 2016. I'm sorry, they're very different. And some would even want us to distinguish the Ahlazar of 2016 from the Rachaz Shayar of 2016. But that aside, surely today's Ahlazar is different. I would say that, you know, he has learned from the paradigm shifts that were ushered in by that debate, that first exchange between James White and Rachaz Shayar. Now, without any disrespect to Rachaz Shayar, I would say that aside from his unfamiliarity with the topics which he discussed with James White, there was also the issue of his arrogance. As Rachaz went into that debate thinking that any Christian would be like the poorly catechized folks that he would typically meet on the street when he's holding camp. So, you know, the result was that he was shocked when he learned in real time that there were actually Christian apologists of a higher intellectual caliber than the kind of people that he would run into on the street. And, I can assure you that Ahlazar will not make that mistake, right? It's obvious to me that he's taking Brown very seriously. And you can even see hints of that in the video announcing the debate. Like, for example, note the way that he makes it a point to note that Brown has a PhD.
You versus Michael Brown. Want to tell them what's it about?
Dr. Michael Brown, have a leader in the Hebrew Israelite community and a PhD scholar.
Look, I'll say this. My point here ultimately is that how well one does in a debate is going to depend on both the opponent and the topic. And one should not underestimate their opponent, right? While there was a lot of talk about Ahlazar opting to not discuss certain topics, honestly, rather than simply try to use that as fodder for polemics, one should conclude that Ahlazar chose his preferred topic thoughtfully, based on his attempts to assess his own strengths, as well as to assess Brown's potential vulnerabilities. Therefore, in closing, I'll say this, at least in closing of this section, it would be prudent for Dr. Brown to not listen to any supporters who flippantly wave off Ahlazar's chances, right? It would be more prudent for Dr. Brown to take Ahlazar seriously than for him to just assume he'll be an easy touch, right? Okay, think about it this way. If on debate night it turns out that a well-prepared Michael Brown overestimated his opponent, surely that would be preferable to the opposite, which is him finding out on debate night that he underestimated him. Food for thought. And with that, as we begin to approach the end of this preview of the debate, I'd like to turn to the third section regarding the platform which is going to be hosting the debate.
So the platform is
Berean TV. All right, on Berean TV, man, a brother who we known for a while. Y'all may have seen Deacon and Sergeant Yashub over there debating, talking, things of that nature. So the Berean TV, respected brother on the Christian side, but, well respected and connected with us on the Israelite side.
everybody knows them and everybody feels like they'll be treated fairly over there. Brother Berean is the YouTube host.
Okay, now let me say up front that I'm a fan of Berean TV, right? I've watched that channel on YouTube for almost 2.5 years now, and I like Berean himself, right? So I was very happy when I heard that his channel would be hosting this debate. Honestly, I was overjoyed to hear that his channel landed the debate. And with that in mind, I feel compelled to point out that there was no thought given to asking any of those who are called moderates to host the debate, right? Now, of course, I realize that many in that crowd might reply, oh, whatever, I wouldn't want to host that debate anyway. But the fact remains that some of the so-called moderates have spent so much time and effort trying to turn their channels into heavily censored echo chambers that the result is that now no one considers those channels to be places where fair and serious dialogue can occur, right? And honestly, the same might be said about certain Christian channels, right? I remember well that over the years, there have been certain Christians and then certain Israelites alike who have said things like, don't go on Berean's channel, Berean will set you up. But what they really meant when they said Berean will set you up, what they really meant was that Berean will let the opposing side speak. Berean will let ideas and arguments that they don't like get airtime, right? Berean won't provide their side with a safe space. And that's why there's people on both sides of the divide who dislike Berean. And in the end, despite all their complaining, the work that Berean has put in across the years has established his channel as a fair platform where ideas can get tested. And that's why myself and several other people see Berean TV landing this debate as well-deserved and well-earned. And with that, finally, we come to the fourth and final section of this video, in which I want to share a brief note on Ahlazar himself, right? And I'm talking about aside from what I've already said earlier in this video. A number of people who watched Ahlazar and Vocab standing together have noted the mutual respect that they seem to have for each other. And some have also noted the respect that Ahlazar showed to Berean, as well as the respect that he showed to Brown. So I just want to quickly share something that I shared on Berean TV recently. While I don't know Ahlazar personally, and my familiarity with him is, based entirely on the internet, and even there it's somewhat limited. I have nonetheless long been under the impression that there are two rather different sides to Ahlazar. Now, admittedly, that could be true of all of us, as everyone is complex, right? None of us are one-dimensional. But here I want to briefly touch on the complexities of Ahlazar, right? In the past, he's talked about being a gifted student when he was young. And aside from that, he's also talked about his past gang activity. And I think the stories he's told are consistent with the impression that he gives off, right? When I say that there seem to be two sides of Ahlazar, what I mean is that there's one side that is rough and fiery. You know, it's something that one might stereotypically associate with the streets, right? But clearly over the years, there has been another side to him, which has shown a desire to be scholarly and gentlemanly, right? And my impression is that as he's gotten older, he might be leaning more towards that scholarly and gentlemanly side, right? And I think, honestly, that you can even see flashes of that in how he described this forthcoming debate.
This is going to be good. It's going to be classy. It's going to be scholastic. We're just going to deal with that information. So, y'all, it's for everybody's going to learn something. I guarantee it.
Now, I only share that to say this. If you're a Christian, it wouldn't hurt to pray for Ahlazar, right? Whatever disagreements you might have with his teachings and whatever disagreements you might even have with his past behaviors, he's a young man with tremendous potential. So, you know, honestly, it'll be interesting to see how he evolves as he continues to mature in the coming years. So I would ask that Christians consider praying that God allows Ahlazar the time to grow and that God guides him along that path and that God guides us all. And with that, I'll close this video here. As always, I welcome any comments, questions, or even criticisms. I often like to point out that I do not censor anyone here, so feel free to share your thoughts, whether positive or negative, and God bless.